That was Laurie Gardner of the Clan Kildow playing Scotland the Brave on the Scottish Highland Pipes. Welcome, I'm Burt Meyer, your host for Folk and Trad, a series of folk music and folk traditions here in the Northwest. For many of us, the idea of bagpipes conjures visions of Scots marching in parades playing the Highland Pipes, and some of us are familiar with the Irish version, the Uillean Pipes, as played in the Riverdance movie. What is not well known is that most countries in the world have one or more versions of the bagpipe. This is one of the simplest. This is the Bagpipes from Sweden. It has a bag, of course, which goes under the arm. It has drones, which make a low humming tone, lays across the lap. It has a chanter, which plays the melody, and it has a mouth stem, so you can replenish the air that's used up by the reeds as they make the tones. Now they're called reeds because they come from the reed plant that grows in marshes. And though they've been used traditionally for hundreds of years, we're now making some of them out of brass and plastic. This, for instance, came from a Yoplait yogurt carton. I have a set of Flemish pipes as depicted in the Bruegel's painting, The Peasant Dance, where the piper is sitting on a stool with a bag under his arm, the drones over his shoulder, and the chanter playing for the dancers. Now the Flemish pipes and the Bagpipes and the Scottish Highland pipes are all known as mouth-blown pipes. This is a set called the Bohemian Bok. It's called a bok because it has a little goat here, which in the Czech language is the word bok. It has a drone, like the others, which goes over the shoulder and down the back. It has the chanter to play the melody, but it does not have the mouthpiece. It has instead a pump, which goes under the arm opposite from the bag arm, by which the piper can pump air into the bag, replenishing what's used up by the reeds. This is called bellows-blown. Now the bellows-blown pipes have two advantages over the mouth-blown. The obvious one is that you can sing and play the pipes at the same time. And the second is that because they don't have the problem of moisture on the reeds, they can be shaved down to where they can be overblown, getting more notes, more tones. This is a set of Scottish small pipes, bellows blown, and the drones lay across your lap, as in the others, and this is the chanter. Now these are quite a bit quieter than the Highland pipes, so preferred by some people. And here is a half set of Uillean pipes, the Irish pipes. They have the drones laying across the lap, the pump, the bag, and the chanter. But the chanter is used a little differently. The end of the chanter is placed on the knee, usually on a piece of leather, so that it blocks off the hole. This offers you one more valve, thus getting even more notes. It's called a half set because it doesn't have the set of cord pipes called regulators, which lay across the drone pipes and have little valves that the piper hits with the back of his hand. This is by far the most complicated set of pipes, and they say that it takes over 20 years to make a good piper. We do have a lass here in the area, Audra Poor, who accomplished it in much less than that. Anyway, you'll have an opportunity to see the full set of pipes as played by one of the Northwest's master pipers, Kevin Carr, who appeared recently at Traditions Cafe. The rest of this segment is turned over to Kevin and his many pipes.
You know, in the ancient world, by ancient I mean, you know, the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the smaller empires that existed before that in Asia Minor, one could not have a civic or a political or religious ceremony without the playing of the pipes. And by the pipes, I don't mean bagpipes. This is pre-bagpipes. They used various kinds of reed pipes, ranging from just reeds with holes cut in them, the shepherd's kind of pipes, to those double pipes that you see on Greek vases. And literally, if you got rid of the pipers, society would grind to a halt. It happened once in Rome. The pipers went on strike because there was a new class of female Phrygian pipers who were getting all the gigs, all the good gigs. And so the guild of the Roman Guild of Pipers went on strike. And the senators were horrified because they had to stay, everything stopped. Couldn't have the ceremonies and everything. But one of the senators said, I know how to get them back, and sent as a peace offering several barrels of wine, knowing the proclivity of pipers from time immemorial. And as soon as they'd passed out, he had the soldiers collect them, load them onto the trailer, and bring them back. And when they woke up back home, they said, all right, strike's over. But they even, in the old days, some of these pipes were so intense, loud instruments, that they had to wear, they had to wear these leather masks because they used a technique of circular breathing. So you breathe in through your nose, and you puff your cheeks up. And they used this technique of circular breathing. If you didn't have this leather mask on, your cheeks would explode, like Dizzy Gillespie. That's the mental picture you want. Anyway, so there were two main types of these double pipes. There were the double pipes where the pipes diverged and were played with two hands. And then they had also something like this. Now this is a modern version. These things were spread from India to Ireland, and from the north to Africa. This is a double pipe. Originally it was pieces of cane, but more recently it's made just carved out of wood with this goat horn. This is a very ancient instrument, and this one happens to come from the Basque country. It's called an alboca, and it has nothing to do with the mouth. But it's a word that has to do with goats, and or the son of a goat or something like that. Anyway, but this kind of instrument, again, is everywhere. And so I'm going to demonstrate this circular breathing, and then I'll tell you the story that I think goes with it. This is in the way of an invocation. You know the story of King Midas? Remember the golden touch? There was a search for true gold, and more of a sort of a banking sort of a way, The more gold they have, the better it is. And I don't know how many of you remember the details of the story. Midas was given the golden touch because he rescued one of Dionysus's favorite acolytes. It was a satyr, half man, half goat, named Marsyas, who turned up in Midas's garden one day drunk. And so Midas nursed him back to health, took him back to Dionysus, who said, what would you like? And he said, well, I want this, and anything I touch turns to gold. And the disaster that happened then. Everything he touched, including his food, and ultimately, sadly, his daughter, turned to gold. And then he wept so piteously and so grievously that Dionysus said, all right, take the items you wish to be returned to their original form and bathe them in the river Patroclus. Now this river is in Phrygia, Phrygia's in Anatolia, and that's the kingdom that Midas was the chief executive officer of. And so he did that, and to this day, if you go to that river and dig in the sand, you see little flecks of gold. Anyway, so all was restored, and Midas realized that gold was not the ultimate answer, and he became a devotee of Cybele, which was the goddess of, well, she was the goddess over Dionysus. She was the one that he was the second in command of. So they would go off into the woods and pursue the mysteries of the meaning of life in the woods, often accompanied by pipes. The chief piper in those days happened to be that same fellow, Marsyas. He was like the rock star at the time, and he would preside over these ecstatic dances which would last days and days and days, and which I'm told still occur in certain parts of Europe, if you're very lucky to find them. Anyway, so, and the way that he got to be such a good piper was that he found the very first set of pipes was built by Athena. And she had heard some shepherds fooling around with it, and she decided to make herself one of these instruments, and she made this pipe, and she was playing it, and she noticed Hera and Aphrodite laughing at her in the corner. She couldn't figure it out, so she went down to the place where she did her meditating, which happened to be the kingdom of Phrygia, and she was wandering in some glade, and she was playing her pipes, and she happened to catch sight of her face in the water, and she had those Dizzy Gillespie cheeks. Horrified, she threw the pipes down and laid a curse on them, and who should find them but Marsyas? Picked them up, and of course, because they'd been touched by a goddess, they were magical, and they never played a bad note, and he was the star. And he was this great star, but one day he let it go to his head in the same way, I don't know if you all remember the Beatles when John Lennon said, "We're bigger than Jesus," and the storm that caused. Well, Marsyas one day said, "You know, I think I'm better than Apollo." And in the next instant, who should be tapping him on the shoulder but Apollo, saying, "How about a little contest? Perhaps a wager on the outcome." And there he was, Marsyas versus Apollo. Apollo played the lyre, just about the most opposite instrument from a bagpipe, from a pipe of any kind. But anyway, they got the muses, they got some human beings to be judges, and they started the contest. And the muses said that it was a draw. And then Apollo said, "Oh, well, why don't we play upside down? Why don't we play and sing at the same time?" And of course, Marsyas lost, and he lost, the forfeit was his skin. So they took his skin, and I know, they were strict in those days. They nailed his skin up to a tree that was sacred to Cybele, and that would have been the end of it, except there happened to have been some humans watching. That was sort of, the kind of the peanut gallery. And one of them was Midas. And Apollo said, "Ren, what did you think of the outcome of the contest?" And Midas now, since he'd had his experience with the gold, he realized that certain values were more important than money, and one of the values he espoused was honesty. And he said, "I liked the pipes." And Apollo looked at him and said, "Well, since you have the hearing of an ass, you might as well have the ears of an ass." And his ears grew until they were giant donkey ears. Did you ever hear this part of the story? Remember? This is my favorite part. So he got himself a big cap, and he covered up his donkey ears, and that kind of cap is called a Phrygian cap, and it actually has survived down through the ages. I don't know if you've ever seen the Revolutionary War. There was a funny little cap with a funny little round beak on it. Well, that was a Phrygian cap. They call them freedom caps, but it's the same little cap that dates back all that time, and it perfectly hid his ears. And so he never let anybody see his ears, and he went back to the palace, and he tried to be a good king. The only person who knew his secret was his barber. And he swore that young man to secrecy on pain of death. Well, the secret was just eating this barber up. He just couldn't Stanley was getting sick. He was getting ulcers. And he went to the physician, and the physician said, if I didn't know any better, I'd say that something was eating you up from inside. You, Bart, perhaps have a secret you haven't been able to tell anyone. And he goes, ooh. The barber said, look, go into the woods, dig a hole, tell the secret into the hole, and cover it up. The barber said, really? He said, yes, best homeopathic remedy, go. And so he went, dug a hole, told the secret, felt a little bit better, dug another hole, told the secret again. Pretty soon the forest was full of these little, churned up little areas. One day the king and his entourage they're riding through the forest, hunting or some sort of thing, and the king looks over and there are all these new little pieces of cane that are growing up out of all these little mounds of disturbed dirt, and a breeze comes up. And the king hears something, and he stops, and he thinks he hears the sound of the wind going, the king has the ears of an ass. He stops, and he looks around his entourage, and they're all going, The king's eyes fall on the barber. He says, come here. The barber walks forward, quivering, says, did you have anything to do with this? And the barber says, he did. And the king, he starts to reach for his sword, and then he looks at this barber, and he looks at these shoots of cane growing up, and in a flash he realizes the whole situation. And that's when Midas became enlightened, and very slowly put his sword back, and reached up and pulled off his cap. And the entourage looked at him, and they started going, look, that looks pretty good, Your Majesty. Oh, that's a good look on you. I just, maybe we could all, I don't know if we could, but it's a good look, it's a good look. And in that way, Midas redeemed himself and really did pursue what was true gold. Now there's one more little coda to this story, which is, I had been telling this a little bit, and it occurred to me, wouldn't it be really interesting if Apollo, knowing this whole situation, had gone and gotten this brilliant idea to take the pipes of Marsyas and take the skin that was hanging up on the goat skin that was hanging up on the sacred tree and make the world's first bagpipe. So I said, I think maybe I'll just include that in the story. Well, about that time, I was on a Skype phone call with a bagpipe maker on the island of Santorini in Greece, negotiating for him to make me a bagpipe. And lo and behold, he starts playing his pipes and singing, and then he says, and do you know where the first bagpipe came from? And he told me that story, with the part about Apollo and Hermes sitting there looking at the skin, and Apollo getting this brilliant idea and taking the skin and making the first bagpipe. So that makes it a true story. It was a great phone call, actually. We both got so excited, and pretty soon he's playing this great bagpipe and singing, and his wife is singing along. And then I got so excited, I got my Spanish bagpipe, and I was playing to him and singing. And I would have loved to have been outside. It's a little yurt, outside the yurt, hearing this international phone call with people playing bagpipes and screaming at each other. So that's the story where bagpipes came from. Clearly substantiated from an objective source. And so what happened is, bagpipes now, what you have here is, you can see this sort of the same thing. There's two bores in this chanter, and there are two pieces of cane that are stuck up here. And this would have been similar, except they took the horn off. This bagpipe comes from Croatia. And there's a whole family of bagpipes from Turkey, all the way in southern and in the Greek islands and in Eastern Europe that have this form. They're just like the old pipes that were just stuck into a bag. And this one, I'll show you how this one sounds. This is a very unusual thing. It's from the Istrian Peninsula. It's called a mih, M-I-H, mih, which to me sounds like something that should be from Monty Python, I think. Pipes that are called mih. But I'll tell you a little story about a player of the mih. to get the full benefit of that music, we have to be in a line doing a very hypnotic dance that goes like this. But that, so there was a beggar, a Kinto, who was playing this. His station was down in the market, and he was playing this as one-eyed beggar. And he made a little bit of money from time to time, and people would ask him questions because he had a reputation for being very wise. Word reached the king, who considered himself the most educated monarch of the day. And this king was horrified to find out that there was anyone else in his kingdom who had any kind of a reputation for being wise. And so he commanded his soldiers to bring the Kinto, and they grabbed the Kinto and they hustled him up, and they brought him into the palace. The king said, "We shall have a contest." And then they hauled the Kinto before him. This guy is surprised. He's never been in the palace. He's never been in the presence of the king. He's sitting there looking at the king. The king looks at his courtiers, holds up one finger. Quick as a wink. The Kinto is a beggar. The Kinto holds up two fingers. The king sits back for a moment, carefully considers, holds up 3 fingers. Without missing a beat, the king holds up his fist. The king sits back in his throne. He looks around. He sees a bowl of fruit. He picks up an orange and tentatively hands it to the Kinto. The Kinto takes the orange, reaches in his pocket, pulls out an old crust of bread, and hands it to the king. He says, "That's it. This man has won. Reward him richly. Give him gold and jewels and whatever he asks for. Take him away." And so the soldiers take him away. They give this man all kinds of rewards and take him back to his hovel. And meanwhile, the courtiers are saying, "Your Majesty, please, we are just not as wise as you. What happened? What was that? Can you translate that for us?" "Well," the king says, "I realize it's above your heads, but I will try to explain it. When I meet a man of learning, I, of course, always begin by discussing theology. So I held up one finger, which obviously means there is but one God in heaven. Well, immediately he held up 2 fingers, signifying, yes, there is God in heaven, but there is the Son of God who has come amongst human beings. Well, of course, I had to counter, yes, there's God in heaven, the Son of God, but there is a Holy Spirit translating through all of us. And without even hesitating, he held his hand up, saying, yes, but all is ultimately one. I couldn't triumph in that field over an intellect like that. So I decided to change the subject to geography. So I picked up an orange. I handed him the orange, clearly signifying the world is round. But again, he bested me. He reached in his pocket and handed me a crust of bread, which obviously meant the world may be round, and men and women may think constantly, but ultimately it is the beneficence of nature that allows us all to survive. Against such a man, I had no chance. Meanwhile, the Kinto was back in his hovel, and he invited all his friends in, and they said, what happened? Where'd you get all this money? What's going on? What is this? The Kinto said, I have no idea. What do you mean? That king, they hauled me in front of the king. The king. And what happened? He said, well, I guess he hauled me in there to make fun of me, because as soon as I walked in there, he held up one finger. He was saying, one eye, one eye. Well, I held up 2 fingers saying, well, only one of my eyes works, but I have 2 of them. I have 2 of them. Well, he wouldn't let go. He held up 3 fingers saying, no, between the 2 of us, we only have 3 eyes. Well, that made me mad, so I held up my fist. Must have scared him, because he wanted to make peace. He handed me an orange. I guess he wanted to have lunch. But I never like to take anything from anybody without giving them some return. The only thing I had was a crust of bread, which I gave to him. I guess they don't have bread up in the palace. Because he got all excited. And look at this. And that's the story of the Kinto. So this is is a bagpipe that comes from Hungary. And it's, again, it's the same sort of a system. It's got two cane reeds up here, and it's two pipes here. But instead of the arrangement like the other one where you play two notes at the same time, this one side plays the melody, and the other side just plays a drone note or a fourth below, kind of a bum, 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 bum. It's also got a little hole board up here that can sharpen any note. So it gives it a little bit of extra juice. And for the first time in these kinds of bagpipes, it has a very low drone note. This is a piece of cane up here, a very low drone note. And this kind of bagpipe was common all through the Carpathian Basin. From the Moldovan people, the Romanians, and the Hungarians. And it seems to have come in with the Hungarian people, the Magyar folks, when they came from Central Asia and picked it up along the way somewhere. Anyway, if you go to that Carpathian Basin, there's a mountain they call Karaman, and it's this huge rocky crag, and the very top of it looks like a sleeping man who is holding a bagpipe the size of a house. And this is the story they tell about the Karaman, that he was a great sorcerer who came into that part of the world at a time when the earth was much closer to the sky than it is now, and there was much more water covering the land. And the Karaman came, and he was this great, huge sorcerer, and his beard was made of moss, and his eyebrows were made of moss. They were yards long, and he wore clothes made of bark, and he had this bagpipe that was the size of a house, with which he could do wonders. The first thing he did was he played this mighty blast of music, and the sea retreated, exposing this land. Then he played this wonderful melody, and greenery sprung up everywhere. And then he played the sweetest possible melody, and sheep grew. He loved sheep. And you could tell they were his sheep because each one of them had a little pine tree growing out of its head. And then he played another playful melody, and out came dogs to guard the sheep. Now he hesitated for a long time before he made any kind of people, because he had seen the people in other countries and he was not all that impressed. But at last, after careful thought, he decided to make some children, little children, because children are so sweet. And so he blew this delicate, sweet melody, and children popped up everywhere. Little toddlers were everywhere, and it was the cutest thing ever, rolling and playing and laughing. And if any of them ever fell in the water, well, the dogs would fish them out. And when they got hungry, they had herbs, and they had grass, and they had sheep's milk to eat. And everything was dandy. And every night he would play them to sleep with beautiful melodies on the bagpipe. And clearly they weren't like my children, who somehow didn't go to sleep when I played the bagpipes. But anyway, but then some of them figured out how to make little sort of dirt, mossy little enclosures. And other ones were watching these industrious ones, and they waited until the enclosures were finished, and then the little unkind conquerors would crawl in and kick the first people out. And in this way, it was the first time someone uttered the word mine. And this made the Karaman very sad. He didn't know what to do. First, he thought maybe he should just blow them all away and start again. But he figured, well, it would probably just go the same way. So he thought he might give them some presents. And so he blew up some gardens. And sure enough, they started tending the gardens. But then the same sort of division happened, and some tended the gardens and others just sat back and watched. And when the food was ready, they went in and stole it. And in that way, the first battle occurred. And now he was really sad, and he blew a big blast of noise, and that scared them, and so they behaved well for the first couple of days, and then they went back to normal. So then he blew up wild beasts and peopled the forests with these wild animals, so that they'd have something to be afraid of, and maybe they would band together. And that didn't work, because what they did was they learned to fight the wild beasts, and then they learned to fight each other. And he began to cry, the Karaman began to cry, and he cried so much that it swept the land dry. But some of the children survived, and now they were hardy and tough, And in order to survive, there wasn't very much greenery, so the lambs didn't get milk, and they figured out to slaughter the lambs and eat the meat and drink the milk. And then they could domesticate some of the animals from the forest, and they got strong. And when they got strong, they stopped liking bagpipe music. As a matter of fact, they started blaming the Kariman for all their woes. And at a certain point, they decided they wanted to get rid of that evil sorcerer. And they grabbed torches, and they headed towards his mountain hold. And as they come up the mountain, he looked at them, and he couldn't help himself. He burst out laughing. And as he was laughing, some of that smoke from the torches got into his nose, and he sneezed, which put out all the torches. And then he gave a particularly loud laugh, and they just fell down the mountain. Well, now they decided, they're going to have to do something worse. They're going to charge up and drive the animals from the forest towards him, and that would do him in. That would do him in. But all he did was he just waved his hands in the air, and snow came down and buried those wild animals. And it buried them so much so that even if you're in the top of those mountains now, occasionally you will find frozen in ice, animals which haven't been seen in that part of the world for long ages. And so they were frustrated and stymied until one of them figured out how to crawl up while he was sleeping and bore a little hole in the bag of his pipes. And out of the pipes escaped such a storm that you couldn't tell the sky from the earth, from the sea, for 3 days and 3 nights, at the end of which he settled down and fell asleep, with his bagpipe tucked under his arm. And they say that when people have returned to that state of grace that we all had when we were little innocent babies, before that first utterance of the word mine, that the Kariman will wake up and once more play bagpipes melodies for us all. And one of the ways that we will know that that time has come is that there'll be many, many, many more bagpipe players in the world. Just so you know. I'm going to play you a little tune on the Hungarian pipes. Did you doubt? Bagpipe in this half. We're heading westwards. You know, there's at least one Scottish piper here. family comes from the borders, Scotland. Although my son had his DNA tested recently, you know, and when you do that, they tell you that you have these genetic mutations, and they can tell you where those mutations occurred. And I was absolutely thrilled to find out we have a mutation that occurred 14,000 years ago in the Caucasus Mountains. He's a clever kid. He tried to get us to chip in. He said, because if you do me, then you'll get both of your results as well. So, see a little set of Scottish border tunes. These are Scottish small pipes. They're inflated with the bellows, which is the latest in 16th century technology. There were bellows pipes played all across Europe and in the British Isles and in Scotland.
Want a besom for to sweep your boots? Come to me, you hinnies, you may have your juice. Buy broom besoms, buy 'em when they're new. Fine heather brid, better never blue. Well, if I have a wife, I care not what she be. If she's but a woman, that's enough for me. Buy broom besoms, buy 'em when they're new. Fine heather brid, better never blue.
This will be the section on love.
And if that she be pretty, that's all right with me. If that she be pretty, that's all right with me. And if she not be pretty, what's the odds at night? Buy broom besoms, buy 'em when they're new. Fine heather brid, better never blue. And if that she be young, well, that's all right with me. And if she not be young, well, the sooner we will be. Buy broom besoms, buy 'em when they're new. Fine heather brid, better never blue. And if she likes a droppy, her and me'll agree. And if she does not like it, all the more for me. Buy broom besoms, buy 'em when they're new. Fine heather brid, better never blue.
There we go. there's a wood on the border called Carter Haw. And Carter Haw is famous for the Ballad of Tam Lin. Any of you know that ballad? It's a great, great story of love, real love. It's a woman who owns this forest. It belongs to her, but she's never seen it because of she's cloistered, as so many women were in those days. And finally she makes her escape. She goes to the forest, she's walking in the forest, and she plucks a white rose from the forest, and a knight shows up and says, "Lady, why are you plucking the roses which I am charged by the Queen of the Fairies to guard?" And she says, "Because they're my roses. Who are you to tell me what to do?" And he says, "I'm in charge." And they start bickering, just like in those 30s movies, you know. And of course, by the end of the afternoon, she's pregnant. And she goes home, and as often happens in the ballads, you know, it's obvious that she's pregnant. And her father knows immediately and says, "So which of my men should we start negotiating with for a wedding?" And she says, she just sniffs and says, "None of your men." And things get embarrassing from there on. And she keeps waiting, but, you know, nothing, no word. So finally she goes back to the forest. And in the story, she begins plucking the herbs that would cause her to lose the child, when up shows the knight again and said, "What are you doing? Why would you want to get rid of this babe that we made?" And she says, "You never wrote, you never called, you never, what?" You know, and he said, "Well, if you would like me to be the father and be in your life, this is what you have to do. Tonight, just tonight, which happens to be Halloween, All Saints, the troop of fairies who have captured me and have me under their power, they're heading off because they have every 7 years to give a tithe to hell, to the fiend. And tonight, I'm afraid, I'm the offering. So it would be very good if you did choose to come and save me. And this is what you do. You need a bucket of water. You need a green mantle, and you need to wait by the side of this certain bridge. And you have to watch at the stroke of midnight as 3 troops of fairies cross the bridge. The last troop will have one knight on a white horse with a silver star on his helmet. That's me. Rush up, grab me off the horse. Well, the Queen of the Fairies will find you and begin showering curses on me. But you have to hold on as hard as you can. She'll turn me into a frog, a snake, a bear, a lion, all manner of scaly, hideous creatures, and finally into a giant burning log which will burn down to an ember which will sear you to your very core. But if you hold on, as soon as I'm that ember, throw it in the bucket and I will emerge and I will be your husband. And the story does not really have any account of how long she debated. Anyway, there she is that night. Little fog on the ground, 3 troops of fairies. You can always tell a fairy troop because of the big heavy horses, beautifully accoutred, and the knights all are handsome, and the horses don't make a sound when they clip-clop by. It's just silent. And so if you ever encounter that, you'll know what you're seeing. So the 3rd troop comes by, 1 white horse, 1 gold star. She makes a dash, she grabs him, pulls him down, and sure enough, there's this shriek, and suddenly there's the Queen of the Fairies with these blazing eyes, hurling these curses, and he changes to a lion, rakes her, and then a bear, and she holds on for dear life to all these scaly, hideous creatures. She's struggling, holding on. Finally, this burning log, it's burning in her arms, but she holds on, and it gets smaller and smaller until it's this ember which just goes right into her heart, at which point she takes the ember and throws it into the bucket. Shh, this shower of steam, and out emerges her naked knight. I love that line, her naked knight. And that was why she had the little mantle. She was supposed to bring the mantle so he'd have something to wear. So she puts the mantle around the fairy queen shrieks at him and says, if I had knew that you had this in mind, I would have turned your heart to wood and your eyes to stone. And then they all vanish. So the reason I like that story is that I spent 35 years as a marriage counselor. And don't you think it's somewhat apt? I mean, you can get there, and it's well worth the wait, mostly. But, you know, anyway, that's the earliest self-help, I think, is the legend of Tamlin.
It could be that I've never heard a good sax player. So these are the Irish bagpipes.
I would like to thank Dick for hosting this evening and hosting these wonderful evenings that have gone on for so long in this place that makes this community really a great place. These are probably the most complicated of the bagpipes. There's 7 reeds in this thing. Tune.
There was an old piper, old and hoary, lived in the town of Ballybori. This old piper, he played for Moses, and here's the only tune that he would play. yan 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 yan.